to Around the Weird. Here's your host, the museum curator of the strange and unusual, Mr. Nothing.
Thank you, mysterious voice, and welcome back to Around the Weird, a booktube channel where I talk about all the strange and unusual literature that I have found in my travels. Today, I want to talk about a book that I read, one that was recommended to me by the scoundrel Lucas over at the Bits of Lit, or Dr. Strike the Sun, whatever traitor to the Republic that he is pretending to be today. I am referring to a book about magic lights and children who are put into prisons. I am referring to A Wish in the Dark by Christina Soontornvat. For those who don't know, Christina Soontornvat is a fairly recent writer, getting a lot of her work published in the past 10 years. She's won a Newbery Award for this book in particular, so that's interesting. She writes anything from like book series to regular standalone fiction to even nonfiction. She wrote about the soccer team that got stuck in the cave in Thailand back in 2018, which is interesting. And she is also Thai American herself, which I think is pretty interesting. I don't think I've read too many books by Thai authors. This might just be the first, and so that's always nice, going around the weird and exploring that. As I mentioned before, Lucas from the Bits of Lit did recommend this to me. And interestingly enough, when he recommended it, he said it was better than Holes, which I think was largely to get my attention because if you recall, like the first video I made for this channel is Holes. I really like that book by Louis Sachar. It's really interesting, and I think it's really good young adult fiction. It's a great book by itself, but it's also really good young adult fiction. And so for him to lay a claim like that book has to be pretty good. And I usually trust the books that Lucas recommends to me, or the movies, because we have somewhat similar taste. We might differ here and there, but usually I can trust something that he recommends. And long story short, this book was great. I am going to recommend it, and I'll talk about why I like it so much in the analysis section. But yeah, I thought it was a pretty solid book, and when I do the summary section, I'm gonna avoid spoiling things too far, but when I get into the analysis, I might spoil a few things here and there. So just be aware that as you're going along, I don't want to spoil this very good book for you. And so anyways, without further ado, let's talk about A Wish in the Dark. I will do a spoiler-free summary and then do a spoilery analysis, and then we'll move on from there. So A Wish in the Dark focuses on two characters. The first character is Pong, a 9-year-old child in Namwan prison. He was put in prison because his mom was caught thieving, and so the children have to go in prison with their mothers, according to the rules in what I'm guessing is Thailand, but a post-apocalypse sort of Thailand, where a city burnt down, not a post-apocalypse, but where one city burnt down and was eventually replaced by something else. But anyways, Pong is in Namwan prison. His mother has died, and he's kind of very sad about it because a lot of what's going on in the prison is unfair compared to what's going on in Chitana, a city of lights, which seems fascinating. Anyways, a man called the Governor is said to be coming to the prison. The Governor is a sort of local legend. He helped the city of Chitana rise from the ashes after a great fire had burnt down much of the city before. He also seemingly has a magical ability to create lights, which powers much of Chitana, and Pong thinks that meeting him will allow him to talk to the governor, appeal to his compassion, and make the prison better for everyone who is within it. But when he talks to the governor chastises him for getting into a fight earlier, and even notes that light only shines on the worthy, a common theme uttered throughout the story. And he tells Pong, you were born in darkness, you are a part of darkness, and you will return to darkness. Very harsh to tell a 9-year-old that, but Pong realizes that the governor isn't who he claims to be, and it also produces a lot of depression and a lack of self-confidence in himself. And eventually he is able to escape the prison, and he makes his way to a monk's temple, where he runs into Father Cham, who is filled with compassion and also has a magical ability to grant wishes or blessings, but he uses general terms as in the past. Like he granted more literal like wishes, and that ended up hurting people. Father Cham allows Pong to stay at this temple and sort of hide, giving him beads to hide his prison tattoo that indicates that he belongs in prison. But the story also focuses on Nock, a dutiful young girl who was there and witnessed the governor at the prison 4 years previously when Pong was 9. He's 13 by the time the story really kickstarts. But Nock was there, and when Pong escaped, her father, who was the warden of the prison, fell into kind of a lack of reputation. He lost some reputation because it was found out that he wasn't really doing his job very well. And so Nock is hoping to up her family's reputation through her participation in martial arts, but at the same time she learns a terrible family secret that she's not actually her mother's daughter. She's her father's daughter through a relationship with someone else that she doesn't know about. Nock runs into Pong, and she recognizes Pong from her time in the prison, and she decides to confront him and hopefully turn him in order to really up her family's credit once again, because it appears that, you know, like turning Nock in will make her family look good and also bring more goodness upon her, and it'll be like, oh, it doesn't matter where she comes from. What only matters is what she's done currently, which unfortunately Nock realizes a hard lesson in this story. In the process of confronting Pong, Pong actually jumps off a cliff into a river below and manages to climb onto a boat that takes him back to Chitana. Nock is hot on the trail and manages to pursue him back. And while Pong is in Chitana, he comes to learn about the income inequality that exists there and the feelings of anger that many people have towards the governor. So much so that they're going to launch a protest against the governor in a few days. And although Pong does not want to be around for that because he might get arrested for escaping from the prison and also participating, he decides to stick around just long enough to help them get it started. At the same time, Nock is traveling around Chitana, and she learns about this protest, and she worries that it will lead to a threat against the governor, and so she goes and tells the governor about this protest. Now, what happens as a result of telling him, and what she learns, and what happens during the protest, I'll let you find out what happens. I'm not going to spoil it here. I might in the analysis section, but please, by all means, go out and read this amazing book. In terms of analysis, Christina Soontornvat presents us with a lot to think about in this story. Like, it is jam-packed with thought-provoking quotes and themes that she carries through the entire novel, and it's just amazing how she is able to do that. Not only that, but also because this is young adult fiction, and often the genre is filled with kind of just junk like that exists only to sell to teens, and some of it is good, but a lot of it is bad, and as I found out with the Princess Diaries series in particular. But this is a good example of something that is really good and really challenges the young readers and gets them to think about stuff that might be happening in their current life. One theme that Soontornvat carries throughout the entire story is the idea of light versus darkness. It's really played against one another. Like, what is light, what is dark, and how do they interact with one another. She's not the first writer to do that, but I do think that she presents light and darkness interestingly enough that this sets this book apart from other books. Light is viewed as positive in Chitana. Especially non-fire-based light, as it lifted Chitana out of darkness. There you go, the darkness. There was a great fire that destroyed Chitana, and then the governor came with his magical light abilities, and he lifted Chitana out of that darkness using that light. So light is viewed as a beacon of hope. It's used as like freedom. It's used as a reminder of the good things that can happen in Chitana. And it's even used to describe the beauty of Chitana, as when Pong's in prison, he looks across the water and he sees the city and it's just sparkling. And he's like, I want that. I don't want to be in this prison anymore. But it also seems like this light creates a disparity between individuals. You see that in the east side of the city versus the west side of the city. The east side is filled with poverty-stricken people. A lot of the people aren't doing too well. There might be some criminals, some people who aren't making as much money as they could be, who are struggling to make ends meet and have to do a lot of manual labor to survive on the east side. And their lights are a bit dimmer because they can't go to the charging stations as often, and they can't really afford the more high quality lights that the governor apparently produces. And so you see it just like a hodgepodge of a bunch of different colors, nothing really aligning the east side of the city. But in the west side, it is frequently described as being a very bright and very beautiful city. Gold lights, especially gold, associated with money, like gold lights abound on the west side of the city. And, you don't see any like lights twinkling or anything like that because the people on the west side can afford to keep their lights on. And it really highlights the disparity that you see with the east side versus the west side. So not only is it like a positive for the city, but it's also a reminder that there's this income inequality, this wealth gap between the people who live on each side of the city, which I think is an interesting way to show this gap. It's definitely something I've not encountered any time before. It's also interesting to see certain characters' perspectives on what light is and what darkness is. The governor views light as something that only the good people get to experience, and that darkness is where the criminals dwell, and the reason they're in darkness is because they're criminals and they're doomed to stay there forever. There is a fascinating quote that I would like to read to you. The governor stared at him for an uncomfortably long moment. I am here to remind you all of the price of breaking the law. Tell me, child, are the nights dark here in Namwan? The boy nodded. As they should be, said the governor. Chitana is a city of light, but that light must be earned. That is why I had this reform center built here, away from the city, to remind the people that wickedness has a price. You see, light shines only on the worthy, and you see that frequently repeated throughout the story, that according to the governor, only people who are good in his eyes get to receive the light. They don't have to be put in the darkness of the prison system. And for the governor, darkness is on those who are wicked and evil. Now, who are wicked and evil? That's a point I'll get to later, because it's described by the governor as who is wicked as evil. It's his definition of wicked and evil. And according to one person, it's highly subjective. But he even tells Pong, like, you are doomed to darkness. Like, you may get out of the prison, but you will always come back, which is the harshest thing you can ever say to a 9-year-old who is still developing, psychologically speaking. And it negatively affects Pong throughout this entire story. A fascinating moment, like, of the governor's dickery, and also like Pong's like, no, like, kid, you're gonna be okay. Like, don't listen to this terrible man tell you that you're not worth anything. Like, darkness is not everything that he claims it is. And you see that described by other characters. Like, they counter that point. Like, Christina Soontornvat does a great job of presenting counterpoints to that. Father Cham in particular believes that everyone is worthy of light, worthy of blessings. And darkness is not something that you're doomed towards. Rather, darkness is just a function of life. And light can help break through the darkness, which to me, it gets at the compassion ideas that are present throughout the story. But also, Nock's father, Commissioner Sivupan, describes light as, there are some people who have and some people who have not. And, some people get stuck there. And so allow me to read you another wonderful quote from this story. What do you mean? Well, sometimes light shines on the worthy, but sometimes it just shines on the lucky ones. And sometimes he looked over his shoulder at the east side, glittering like a rainbow across the river. Sometimes good people get trapped in the dark. And like, can you see what Soontornvat's getting at there with that quote, with that phrasing specifically? Like, light shines on the lucky ones. She's referring to privilege, and then she's saying some people get trapped in the dark. Cycles of poverty, cycles of punishment, where like someone isn't able to rise through the ranks because society or whatnot, they just have bad breaks, and because of that, they're unable to escape these cycles, and they're trapped forever. And that's really profound, especially for like a children's, not a children's, but young adult fiction. Like that's something that you don't often see, especially in a genre that's aimed at breaking down very complex ideas. And so she's really getting at like privilege and like the idea that the governor can say that there are those who are doomed to darkness because they are wicked. But Sivupan acknowledges the point, and maybe because he knows this, like one of the issues is that he didn't show up to his prison job so often. Maybe because he knows this, he was unwilling to go to a job where he didn't believe in the governor's message, and he ends up quitting later on in the story, like because of that. So that's really, really fascinating writing on Christina Soontornvat. She's not the first to introduce these ideas, but I love how she's doing it, and to the audience in which she's presenting too. And I touched on these ideas before, but Soontornvat also talks about compassion and privilege, specifically with the character of Father Cham, who shows compassion to everyone, especially those who have been cast out of Shatana. Those people are the most in need of help and assistance, which Father Cham and those in his temple are more than willing to give. And the governor, like, he's the exact opposite of that, where I think he's aware of privilege and the need for compassion, but perhaps because of his skewed worldview, maybe influenced by what he saw during the first destruction of Shatana, like he's unwilling to give up the idea that there are some who are inherently wicked. And he believes that some people just don't deserve compassion, that you lock them up in prison. Near the end of the story, it's revealed that he's planning on building another prison for children. And so that's the clearest indicator that he's not a man of compassion. I feel like privilege is explored through Nock's journey as well in this story. Like the first thing that happens, one of the first things that happens with Nock is that she sees a young boy steal something, and she approaches that boy, and Pong interrupts her, and Nock is like, this boy absolutely deserves prison for what he did, no exceptions. And Pong is like, well, as you can see, this boy's mother can't afford to pay for what he stole. He will make amends for what he did through service, but please do not put him in prison, as it would upend everyone's life and make everyone a little bit more miserable. And Nock is unwilling to hear that because she is, I think, because of her place of privilege, where she believes what the governor is saying, that everyone who is in a bad place got there because they deserved to be there. And through the story, she learns that no, some people are born into bad circumstances, and there's nothing they can do about that, or that they have experiences in life that produce something difficult for them. And through Nock's eyes, we're allowed to see her journey towards compassion and understanding and social justice activism later on. But I really like how Soontornvat does that. She doesn't simply, make this easy for Nock. Like, this is a struggle for her, and it's something that I think is pretty good in this story. Now, she does this by having Nock be revealed that her mother ended up in prison. And so through that, we really learned that Nock might only be compassionate because she was she is in the same position as Pong. But I think that maybe the writing could have been a little bit better if Nock was just a rich person slowly learning to be more compassionate, because if she's in the boat with Pong, then she hasn't really learned a lesson. It's just she's on the other end of this mess now, and that's a small problem, but I do think it's a tiny issue that could have been fixed. Another big idea that I think Soontornvat makes very clear in this story is that the governor is a fascist leader. So this is a view for young adult readers to see what a fascist reader or what a fascist leader is like without blatantly calling it out, allowing young readers to really come to that conclusion on their own by seeing, what fascism looks like in the real world and saying, hey, that's not appropriate, like comparing and contrasting that. So how is the governor a fascist leader? Well, one way is that he has a reliance on punishment. He believes in opening up prisons and enacting violence against people who do not listen to him or who are unworthy or are prisoners or who are drawn to crime in some sort of way. So you see that often in fascist governments, especially ones with death penalties and who believe that anybody who does even the tiniest thing wrong deserves to be in prison rather than reformed, which would actually benefit them and make society a little bit better. But you also see an us versus them morality in this story, where with the Nazis it was like, hey, it's us versus the non-peer people, us versus the Jews or something like that. And you see that in this story because it's us, those who are worthy of the light, versus them, the prisoners, the criminals. We can't have them, or something like that. And you see that a lot in fascist governments, and it's very prevalent here. You have the idea of a big, strong central leader at the center of it, someone who says, only I can fix this, only I can fix it. And that's what the governor pretty much believes. He says, without him, you would not have light in Chitana, which might be true, but also clearly not true by some discoveries that are made throughout the story. But also, he says that the city is going to go into darkness and go back to its criminal elements without him. So only he is capable of fixing this. He also targets his political rivals, where it's implied that he might have killed Ampai, one of the characters in the story who organizes the protest, which you typically see in fascist sort of strongman dictatorial type governments. And you also see demonizing protesters going on, which is what happens. The governor is like, let's arrest these protesters. They're nothing but criminals, and they belong in the prisons that I'm creating. Even though none of these protesters are actually criminals, they're just protesting the oppression and inequality that exists in the society. But another thing I really like about this is how charismatic the governor is. Usually there's an urge to make a character as evil and as repugnant as possible. But the governor is a very likable kind of person when he's not doing evil things. There's a reason that he has a larger-than-life figure. Like he delivers light, and he also shakes hands and makes everybody feel like they're good and special. And so it really gets at the idea that not every evil is an apparent type of evil. Sometimes the worst people can be the kind of people that you want to get a drink with or something like that. Really good on Soontornvat's part not to just make him like a cartoony kind of figure, although he does kind of turn cartoonish near the end of the story. I'm willing to forgive that because 10 years ago I would have said this is weird, but 5 years ago, throughout the past 5 years, we've seen a lot of cartoonish evil people in the world. So it's perfectly in line with how people might act, especially when they're backed into the figurative corner. And again, I think about the implications of all this for teenagers, like being shown the system of inequality and this system of oppression, and then taking what they've read and examining the world that we live in, where there's a lot of people who have nothing, and a lot of people who have way more. And what is she getting you to think about this? What is she asking you to do? She's not directly calling you to challenges. She's just showing you one way of challenging and maybe fighting this system of inequality. And I really like that about this story because it's very bold, and I think it would challenge a lot of teen readers who may not know that they have this position of privilege and affluence, but this book is probably maybe going to make them more aware of that. I mentioned a couple of dislikes before, and it's not enough to sink the story. The other dislike that I want to point out is how Pong and Knock always seem to run into each other. Feels a bit too coincidental, especially in a city that's described as large like Chitana. It just seems unlikely that they would constantly be running into one another. But for the sake of the story, it has to happen. So I'm not really upset about it, and it doesn't sink the story at all. It's just a very unusual thing that has to keep happening for this story to work. Anyway, those are my thoughts on A Wish in the Dark. Plenty to talk about. I didn't even go into all of Pong's character, which you could write essays about. You could write psychological analysis about Pong. I won't do that right now, but there's so much more we're talking about, and I think that's why this is a pretty special book. It might end up on my year-end list, and I think it's pretty funny because last year I read another book, Stoner, that was fabulous in November, and I hope this is a trend that continues in November. So if you read this before, you simply want to comment on something I said here, feel free to do so below. I would love to hear from you and discuss this book in more detail. Otherwise, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. I'm pretty sure a lot of people already know about this book, but if they don't, let's make them more aware, especially of Christina Soontornvat. I look forward to more of what she writes about. And until then, I wish you the best of luck in your weird and magical travels. Farewell.